Greetings YouTube, greetings new Warframe players, welcome to Modding 101 for weapons. This is basically meant to be a guide for newer players who are just starting out in the game and they have not quite yet grasped how to mod a weapon. Now I specifically chose the first weapon I'm going to work with as a weapon that you more than likely might start with or have access to. That is the MK1 Bratton. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start. Alright, now the first main rule of modding weapons is you always want to add your initial damage modifier first before anything else, and for rifles specifically it is the serration mod. There we go, and I'm just gonna put in a lower level one just to show you how it looks. Okay, so added serration to lower level. I don't have any ranks on this one currently. As you can see, boosts damage by 15%. Once you finish put in your main damage buffer or damage modifier, you want to look at your secondary modifier for this weapon, which is slash. A lot of new players probably won't have that damage modifier, but if you do just so happen to have it, you definitely want to add that as well before you start with like elements. So once those two initial damage modifiers are increased, that's when you can go into adding modifiers such as, you know, elemental damage, you know, reload speed, things like that. You always want to boost your initial damage first. Otherwise you're pretty much messing up the entire weapon setup and the potential for higher damage output. Now I can just show you by adding a heat mod. See, we added 3 points of heat damage, and if you add another element mod, it creates a different element. Like let's say we go ahead and added cryo rounds. That converts it to blast now, and it's 6 points of blast damage. Now as you level these up, these values will change. I can show you by simply swapping out the damage modifier for the serration to a higher level, and you'll see what I mean. Let's go with 75%. Now notice how it jumped up. Blast went from 6 to 9, slash damage went from 9 to 18, so on and so forth. You want to definitely focus on the slash because it's the primary attribute of this weapon. Thus far, that's where you'll get the most damage output from it. And as you upgrade your mods, it becomes more powerful. See, I added 105 and it jumped up to 21. And if I go ahead and add my rank 8 mod here, which is 135% damage, see it jumped up to 25. Now I know it may seem like this weapon might not be able to go any higher or get any stronger, but that's where Forma as well as the catalysts come in. If you look at the bottom right of my screen, you see there is R3 for actions, then square for mods, triangle remove, and overback. Press the action button, and here's what you see. You have the catalyst. If you add that, it will give you an additional 30 points to work with, and then the polarization is using Forma to add a polarity slot, which is those symbols you see in the circle there, and each mod has a different polarity. As you can see, this has the V looking polarity, the next one is the line, as well as this one has the line, and this one looks kind of like a boomerang. But whenever you add a Forma, it'll ask you to choose which one you want, which I can demonstrate now, but I'm not going to actually do it. and you can click which slot you want to put it in, change it up. You got 3 different choices you can use. Okay, and once you do that, then you will have a polarity slot that will then half the drain. So if I put the V polarity slot, it'll put the drain for this down to 6, which in turn gives me more space to add more mods or rank up the mods that I currently have on the weapon. Alright, so this concludes that for the primary weapon. I'm going to move on to secondary, which is pretty much the same concept with all weapons, but each weapon can be a bit different to modify, so to speak, and they each have their own special mods as well. Now for this one, the main initial damage modifier is Hornet Strike. I have a rank 8 version here, so I'll throw that on first. And you see my initial damage jumps from 9.6 to 26.4. Then we can throw on slash, if I have a slash modifier, which I think I do. Let's see. Maybe I don't, or maybe I don't have one that can actually be used on this weapon. That's something else that you have to be aware of, is some mods can't go on certain weapons. Yeah, it doesn't look like I have a slash mod, but that's okay. You can use stuff like multi-shot. Like for me here, I have barrel diffusion. Basically what this mod does is it effectively doubles the damage output, but that's for more advanced users. When you get further down the line, you're not going to have this mod straight away, but I'll just use it to show you what happens. Basically you're going to see my damage is going to double here. Went from 26 to 58, and what that pretty much does for weapons that have like bullets, it pretty much doubles the amount of bullets that come out, thus far increasing the damage. And it also doubles your stats because you're shooting double of the ammunition, and it doesn't increase your ammunition drain either, which is a good thing. Excuse me. Alright, and then once you finish adding that, and you can choose an element to mod, or an element to add, just to give it that extra oomph when you're attacking enemies. Now each enemy is weak to certain elements. It's best to learn what those elements are and mod your weapons accordingly. But that's something that we can go into on a later video. But I just was using this as an example. And as you can see, this goes from being a pretty weak weapon to dealing some decent damage for, you know, lower level enemies. When you get up to the higher levels, you're obviously gonna have to use some better mods. Well, not better mods, but you'll have to upgrade the weapon to make it a little bit stronger than it actually is to start with. And lastly, we're gonna move on to the melee weapon. Now with melee weapons, you have the stance mod, which gives you potential for additional points. As you can see, instead of 30 as my capacity, I have 34, and that's because of that stats mod. The problem is this polarity doesn't match, and I don't actually have one that matches the polarity, but I'll show you exactly what I mean here in a second. Alright, see what the polarity is? It's these two little dashes, and if you have a mod that matches that weapon polarity, it'll give you bonus points. If it doesn't match, you still get bonus points, but it's just a lot less. Like for this, it's gonna be 4 because it doesn't match. Now if it was the two little lines, I would get 10, which is pretty good for being able to mod a weapon. And before I move on, I'll show you what I mean. Let's go with my orthos. Okay, now in the polarity slot, you see Shimmering Blight, and it matches the polarity for this weapon. and as you can see, I have an additional 10. Now for this weapon, I actually have a catalyst on it, which, as you can see, my capacity is at 70. So when I double my mod capacity, it goes from 30 to 60, and that's with the catalyst, which is installed. And then with that stance mod, I get an additional 10 points to work with. Alright, now let's switch back. Okay, now the same thing goes for these weapons. As far as the initial stats modifier, you always want to go with your main damage modifiers first, which for melee weapons is pressure point. It's going to give you your initial weapon boost. Now it goes from, let's see, let me change this a bit. Okay, so the base attack of this weapon starts off at 45 slash. When I added that pressure point, jumped me up to 100. Now, I don't know how many people use like the spin attacks, the leap attacks, the wall attacks, but me, I'm a heavy user of spin attack. And as you can see up there in the corner, left corner, my spin attack stat is at 286. So I always focus on that more so than the initial slash damage, because I'm always using the spin attack. Now when modding the weapon, if you have a mod that can boost the initial damage, like the slash, that is very good to have. Buzzkill, it's more of a rare mod that most players won't have beginning out off the bat, but you can find, where is it? Is it Jagged Edge? Yes, Jagged Edge. You can find Jagged Edge pretty easily, and that will boost your initial slash damage. So see, you jumped up to 190. You always want to focus on the two main damage modifiers first, which is the initial weapon damage, and then the damage modifier that that weapon is based off of. For this one, which is slash, you'll have some weapons that's puncture, and then you have some weapons that have the highest in impact. You want to increase the stat on whichever one it's highest in to create a more effective weapon. Alright, and then from there, basically once you boost those two initial stats, then you can go ahead and do an element. But for me, I will choose, let's go with North Wind, and say Shocking Touch, which is electric damage, and that creates magnetic damage, which is good against the corpus. And as you can see, after I did that, I have 6 slots remaining to where I can throw something else on, and I would recommend doing something that just helps out the weapon in general. And let's see what we got that I can put for the polarity slot. As a matter of fact, Berserker, that's a pretty good mod. Again, not one that you're going to start off with initially, but just going to show you what the polarity does when you do that. See, it half the amount of the drain down to 5, whereas it would have been 9 normally, and that in turn would have not been able to fit on this weapon. But see, that's where the whole forma and the polarity comes in, to where you can make your weapon stronger than it actually has space for. Okay, so I believe this concludes our little tutorial. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment box below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in. This is Dark9SGE signing off.